Hello, friends, and welcome. Today we are going to be doing a quick product review for this beautiful Hydrangea Hill suite of products. I'm going to be showing you the stamp set, the dies, the designer paper, some samples, some tips. We're going to be stamping a little bit together. So let's look at this beautiful set of products. This is Patty Bennett. I am a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator and blog at pattystamps.com. So this catalog, if you don't yet have it, is called the Stampin' Up! Mini Catalog January to June 2021. It starts January 5th along with Celebration, which this catalog has free products in here that you can earn with your $50 or $100 order. So we'll be looking at that in another video. But today, let's go back to Hydrangea. This is such a great suite. So we have beautiful samples, color suggestions, stamp set and dies, some acetate paper, ribbon, pearls, and designer paper. And then over here on page 20 is a little bit larger view of the stamp set and the dies. So I thought it would be great to show you everything up close and then to give you some stamping tips with this suite of products. So here is the stamp set. It's photopolymer, and one thing to note is that it does say on here that the images are shown at 75%. So it's just something to note where you can see here I've stamped the actual image and here it is on the cover. The only time this throws me is when I'm looking through my stamp sets for a greeting to use, and I think I'm going to use it on a specific punch or die, and then it turns out to be too large because the stamps inside are larger. So that's just something to note on here. There are also hydrangea dies in this suite as well. You can get the dies and the stamp set as a bundle, and you get a 10% discount when you buy them together. And I thought it might be helpful to see what they look like when they're actually die cut. So this also helps to show you the dies and the stamps that go together. So the large hydrangea with the stem and the leaves, that's all one piece, die cuts out together. The small leaves will die cut, and these two little blossom bloom clumps. They're like little plants. You could put them in a pot. You can actually add this one onto the top, which I will show you. So those are the images that coordinate with dies. Then we also have this leaf that can go on top, and I'll show you a sample of that. 2 tags, this great piece, and I die cut this with the designer paper, and I wanted to show you that in a couple of samples so that you can kind of see how this piece works. And then also there's this strip. So these were die cut with this, and they're all individual. So when you die cut those, you will actually get, let's see, 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 separate little flowers. So this is this piece, and it just has all these cute little petals and flowers that die cut. And I wanted to show you, can you see here how you can use either your finger or you could use one of the pokey tools, and you can kind of lift those up and get a lot of dimension with that. So that's kind of an overview there of the dies and the stamp set. And then look at the gorgeous paper. So this is a 12 by 12 set of designer paper, and this represents all the patterns. You can see the beautiful blues and purples, the greens, the pinks. This is actually Rococo Rose, which I'm so glad they used it because this will be a retiring color. So we want to make sure that we are using that and stocking up a little bit on that cardstock and a reinker before it retires this May. So that's a representation of all of the papers in this Hydrangea Hill pack of paper. So let me show you a couple of samples, and we'll make one of these together. This is a card that I used that beautiful Rococo Rose cardstock, and then that pattern of paper with the Rococo Rose, and I stamped Rococo Rose onto the top of the flower, and I used Granny Apple Green on the stems. And we'll do that here in just a minute. We're going to stamp one of these and die cut it so that you can see this. And it's just a few pieces of supplies here. So we just have our top fold, 4 1/4 by 11 Rococo Rose cardstock. I have my 4 by 5 1/4 inch piece of designer paper, and I will just adhere that. I like Seal Plus. You just saw me use that. You can use Stampin' Seal. You can use liquid glue. Whatever you like is fine. And then on this die cut, this is from Stitched So Sweetly. I like to actually use a piece of our foam adhesive sheets on the back rather than just a few dimensionals, but you can do dimensionals. That's great as well. I just feel like this gives such a nice lift and support to this. So I put that in the middle, and then you could go ahead and stamp the image right onto that die cut if you wanted to. But I actually stamped on a separate piece of paper and I die cut it. It just gave it I didn't raise it up, but it gave it just a little bit of definition around the edge to die cut it and add it. So let me give you a couple of tips here when stamping this image. I will show you in a minute that on my first couple samples, I decided to try smoky slate, gray granite, basic gray. I thought a gray would look good, but it gets kind of muddied in the color, and really black stands out so much better. So I used my Memento Black ink, but it doesn't have to be Memento Black. It could be any black that you have, because we're not coloring. We are just going to stamp. This is the color palette I used for my samples today: Rococo Rose, Seaside Spray, Highland Heather, Granny Apple Green. So for this particular one, we are going to do the Granny Apple on the stems and leaves and Rococo Rose on the floral part. So let me give you a tip here on the floral part when you're filling it in. Now you can see, I haven't inked this yet, but you can see that it is a little bit larger than that black outline. When you die cut it, it trims that down. But if you are just stamping, be aware that it will kind of go outside the lines. One thing I did find is that I personally liked this better when I stamped off, but I didn't press real hard. I just gave it sort of just a little press on my grid sheet, and then I'm stamping onto the cardstock, and it lightened it up a little bit. And here's what's really interesting. Do you see how there's kind of some lights and darks? Part of that is the actual stamp, but part of it is because I just really lightly pressed on my grid paper, and I took the ink off a little bit irregularly, and that was on purpose. I wanted to have sort of some lights and darks. And then on the stem, I just stamped it full strength, but you could, of course, stamp off like I did on the Rococo Rose part, and then stamp onto your paper. So there is an example of how easy and how beautifully this stamps. That's Rococo Rose and Granny Apple Green. And oh, you did probably notice here, I used my Stampin' Pierce matte, and that is because when you are using a photopolymer stamp, there is no cushion behind there between the stamp and the block. So you need that little extra cushion when you are stamping with photopolymer. I'm going to just cut this apart and use my mini Stampin' Cut and Emboss, which is also available January 5th. So you are probably watching this on the 5th or later. So if you are, then you'll know that it's available right now, and it's so cute. Isn't it adorable and so compact and fun? So I will use this die that's going to cut out the whole image. And I like to go ahead and use just a little Post-it tab, and I just press it onto my shirt sleeve a couple of times to take off a ton of the stickiness. I don't want a super huge amount of sticky on there. And then I will roll this through. And you'll find that so many of the Stampin' Up! Images fit onto this mini Stampin' Cut and Emboss machine. And I just love having it handy right here on my table. I keep it right here. It's so great. Another tip, I do keep one of these 8x8 grid sheets from the Stamparatus, and I often use that just to stamp off. I think I actually had another folded piece in there, and I use that when I'm stamping off a lot of times. I find that that's just a helpful way to get some of your ink off and not dirty up your entire grid sheet. So I'm putting a little bit of adhesive and putting that on. And then this, you might have recognized, this was the little tag that we had here on our set of dies. The thank you is one of the stamps in the set, and I am going to just use a Stampin' Dimensional on the back to raise it up just a little bit. And that'll just be kind of our extra little focal point there. And you might have noticed this pink twine. It's not in this suite, but it is in the Snail Mail suite, and it has white and pink. And I thought it went really pretty with this Rococo Rose. And then, of course, our last little piece here was to add the beautiful pearls. So this is a part of the Hydrangea Suite, and you can see we have a couple shades of, I believe, Grape and Heather. This is probably Seaside Spray, and then we have the Rococo Rose, but it also goes well with Flirty Flamingo or Petal Pink or Blushing Bride, so you could use that with any of your pinks. And then I added 3 of those onto the card to finish it off. And that's how simple this one is. Isn't that pretty? I like that so much. Then I did a similar version with Highland Heather cardstock, and this pattern that has both the purples and the blues. And then can you see on top of here, I wanted to show you those extra little pieces. So I ended up with some strips, and look, I just made the best effort to take care of every little inch out of that, and I die cut these extra pieces out of my designer paper. I didn't want to waste all those little extra parts. And that is what I used to put on top of the stamped image. And I thought that turned out really neat. And then these little pieces are those single flowers. Isn't that cute? And the ribbon is the gorgeous grape ribbon from this suite. And it's really beautiful. It ties real nice. And I used one of the greetings and one of the labels that comes in this die set. Here's a tip for you. When you're die cutting all those tiny little flowers, I just take a roll of my glue dots and I stick one to every glue dot, and then I keep this handy and I use them directly off of here. It seems like that is just a little bit easier way to keep track of them and not lose them while I am crafting. Let's look at our next sample. And I also wanted to show you another technique for coloring in before we go. So don't let me forget that. By the way, if you're looking for these samples, do check pattystamps.com. From January 5th on, I will have all of these hydrangea samples and this video on my blog for you to check out. So this is just using the little white note cards, and I wanted you to notice all the difference in the lights and the darks with the Highland Heather ink. and I really think it looks pretty. And again, that comes from stamping off lightly and then stamping onto your cardstock, and it produces those lights and darks, and I think it looks great. So this is just an example of a few. You can see I just used a strip of the card designer paper on the left and did basically the same design. So you can go super simple, or you can dress them up with other layers like we were just doing. Last thing I wanted to show you on this card are these greetings, and I actually used the Oh So Ombre paper in the Celebration catalog. So you can see on each one it's slightly different with the gradient of light to dark, and then I used one of the new punches, and this is the, sorry, I just had to lean over and get it. This punch has the scallopy part and the regular oval. So that's what I used to punch out these. I did want to show you when I said in the beginning that I tried it at first with the gray. I tried all my different shades of gray and smoky slate and gray granite and whatnot, but it just got too muddy. It was too light and the color took over. So what I will be doing is using those extra parts that I just showed you to kind of cover up and help that look a little bit better. And then I also did this where I stamped the top and die cut it with that die that makes all the extra little petals, and I think I will use that to cover up on a couple of these. I think it'll make those three look a little bit better. Let's look at one last technique I wanted to show you with the blending brushes. So I just used up some scraps, and I went ahead and I stamped the top part of the hydrangea. Then I've got Highland Heather and Seaside Spray. And if you haven't seen these new blending brushes yet, these are really fun. They come in a 3-pack. So what I'm going to do is get a total of 9 brushes, so 3 packs. So I'll keep one for purples, one for blues, one for greens, one for reds, one for yellows, and I think that'll do it. If you want to have one for every single color, my goodness, by all means, help yourself, and you're welcome to do that. I just really felt that having one per sort of like a color family, a color gradient would be just fine. So you just tap it onto your ink pad, and you always want to test it on your scrap first. If you go right onto your image, you risk it being possibly too dark. And all you do is just swirl, and you get just the most beautiful, soft coloring. Isn't that pretty? What a quick way to color that in. And then I opened up my Seaside Spray, and I chose these 2 colors because of the designer series paper. I knew that these colors were in that paper, and I thought it would look really great together on this image. That's really all there is to that. Isn't that neat? So pretty. And so then you would get just all different colorings depending on what color you use. And the die, you have your choice. You can do one of 2 things. So remember, we used this die to cut out the whole flower and the stem. So you can use that to just cut out the floral part. Or, as I showed you on this card, I actually used this piece, and I used those extra, these 2, and you could cut them out with that, and it would just produce that extra little dimension and those extra beautiful parts. So it would look somewhat like this, although this was the designer paper, but you can kind of replicate that with those blending brushes. So I think that is all the tips that I wanted to share with you. And I hope you enjoyed seeing the color palette that I chose. Again, we had Highland Heather, Seaside Spray, Granny Apple Green for the leaves, and then we also did Rococo Rose. And so we saw that in these beautiful samples here. And then I also showed you this idea just a little bit simpler on a note card. I hope you enjoyed that. Please visit pattystamps.com for more information about this hydrangea suite and my daily samples and tips. Thanks for joining me. Bye-bye.